Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I want to look at the weekend of December the 21st and 22nd, 2024. So the big event this weekend is the solstice, when the sun moves into Capricorn. And by definition, when the sun moves into this sign, it is, in the northern hemisphere, the shortest day. In the southern hemisphere, it is the longest day. And the solstice happens at an absolutely precise moment. And this moment can be of spiritual significance. It's the moment where a gateway is open and the forces of the universe flood in, and they perhaps imprint themselves on the earth. So that's why you can perhaps look at the chart of the precise moment of the solstice and perhaps get an idea about what the next 3 months are going to be like between now and the spring equinox at the end of March. Of course, when you're talking about solstices and equinoxes, there is a certain northern hemisphere bias. We call it the winter solstice, but of course, from the perspective of the southern hemisphere, it's kind of a summer solstice, isn't it? It's like with the spring equinox in March. It's from the southern hemisphere perspective, it's the beginning of autumn. So apologies for any hemisphere bias in this video. But before I talk about the winter solstice and what it might mean, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for this weekend, which is the weekend of the 21st and the 22nd of December. If you happen to like this video, I would be really happy if you were to indicate this, that you did indeed like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would be really grateful if you were to subscribe. I was hoping I was going to get to 9,000 subscribers by the end of the year, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So I have to sort of put that back. Maybe in January I'll make 9,000. Maybe in February, if I'm lucky, I'll make 10,000. But anyway, if you could subscribe, if you're not subscribed, I would be very grateful. Anyway, let's look at what's happening in terms of the weekend. So this is the chart for the weekend, for the middle of the weekend, midnight on Sunday. And if you look at midnight on Sunday, we have the moon at 23 Virgo. So certainly on Saturday, the moon continues its movement through Virgo, and it makes a trine to Uranus. And so with the moon in Virgo, I suppose it's quite materialistic. I mean, not materialistic in a bad sense necessarily, just concentrating on the details, making sure everything is properly planned, everything's in order. I suppose Christmas is just around the corner. If it's 22nd, I suppose when's Christmas Day? 20. That's Wednesday, isn't it? So it is about to be Christmas. It's almost a Christmas weekend, and I suppose Moon in Virgo not entirely getting into the spirit of the season, because the Moon in Virgo on Saturday, it does make an opposition to Saturn. So Saturday might in a way be quite a serious day with that opposition, wanting to make sure that everything is in order, but it not always being the case. There are just things to worry about. And it's not just the fact that the moon is opposition Saturn, the moon is square Jupiter. And so there might be a certain amount of excessiveness there, just trying one's hardest to get things together, but it might not always be easy. Then on Sunday, moon moves into late Virgo, and indeed London time 19:08, which is 8 minutes past 7 in the evening. The moon moves into Libra. So in Europe and Africa, Sunday evening, you might see something of a change as the moon moves out of Virgo and into Libra. I think on balance that's going to be a fortunate change. I think things might be easier and there might be less worry, just less concerned about stupid things that you find yourself being concerned about anyway. And with the moon in Libra, perhaps you'll be able to focus more on enjoying yourself, maybe, and perhaps enjoying other people's company and finding a sense of balance. Now, the most important event this weekend is, of course, the solstice. And so the solstice takes place London time at 9:20 in the morning on Saturday. So that means what does it make? That makes it 4:20 in the morning Eastern Standard Time and 1:20 in the morning 1:20 in the morning on the West Coast. So with the solstice, it is a special moment, and it is a completely precise moment. And we could say, okay, the sun is moving into Capricorn. That's certainly just one element of it. It's nice that the sun is going to be moving into an earth sign, and it's going to stay in an earth sign for the next month. And so that sun moving into Capricorn, it just gives us all some grounding, and we can get an idea about what's real and what's just plain fantasy. And so I think that's perhaps much needed, the sun moving into Capricorn. And it comes at a time when the moon is in Virgo, so we've got the moon and the sun and the moon both in earth signs, and I think that's perhaps going to be reassuring, and we'll have some understanding of what's real. Now, there is a spiritual dimension to the sun moving into Capricorn, which I think I'll talk about at the end of the video. But I suppose if you're into sort of the occult and magic and rituals, the sun in Capricorn, sun moving into Capricorn can be of significance. But I'll talk about that at the end of the video. Now, we have the moon moving into Virgo the moon moving into Libra on Sunday evening. Now, if you are in Australia, and at least it's moving into Libra Sunday evening in the UK. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, really it's just a total Virgo weekend. You can see, in fact, at midnight Sydney time, the moon is exactly in the middle of the sign Virgo. There you go. Moon at 15 degrees Virgo dead. 15 degrees 0 minutes Virgo. So Australia and New Zealand don't have to worry about moon moving into Libra. Virgo, I suppose, all weekend long. And still you've got the solstice. The solstice is at midnight. So on Saturday, late on Saturday, the sun moves into Capricorn. So all of us share the solstice over the weekend, and I suppose there isn't much more to report. Now, one thing I should say about all of the signs, of course, is that we're starting to have the run up to Jupiter making a square to Saturn, and Jupiter square Saturn, I believe, is exact on Christmas Eve on December the 24th. And that's perhaps something we should think about. It's a collective aspect. It's Jupiter and Saturn are social planets, so we might not feel it personally, but it's economically important. It's an economic milestone, and it's locked into the solstice chart, the precise moment when the sun moves into Capricorn. So I think rather than talk about Jupiter Saturn now, I'll talk about that towards the end of the video when I look at the solstice. So I suppose I should also look at the heliocentric position. So turning to the positions of the planets with the sun in the middle of the solar system. This is what we have, and Possibly the main aspect over the course of the weekend is Mercury opposition Saturn. So there's Mercury in Virgo, opposition Saturn in Pisces. So Mercury opposition Saturn, it is a serious aspect, and I suppose it's kind of echoes that Moon opposition Saturn. So you've got Moon opposition Saturn geocentrically, Mercury opposition Saturn heliocentrically. So perhaps over this weekend and into next week, there are some serious thoughts. We're not entirely optimistic, and I think a lot of us may be having sort of worries about the future and how things are going to turn out. Because since Jerome Powell's comments on interest rates on Wednesday, when the markets didn't like that, and the markets responded badly. Cryptocurrencies in particular went down a lot. I don't know what they're doing now. I'm recording this on Friday morning. I don't know what's going on with the markets today, but on Friday at least. But there is uncertainty in the markets, and heliocentrically we've got Mercury opposition Saturn, and that might represent wider uncertainty. It's not just about the markets, I suppose. If you're a Democrat in the United States, you might be concerned about Donald Trump becoming president. I suppose if you're a Republican, you're really looking forward to it. And there's a question of what can happen in the next month, and we've of course got a government shutdown. Again, I think the government shutdown, or the threat of a government shutdown in the US, is connected with that Jupiter-Saturn square. Aside from the Mercury opposition Saturn, we do actually have Mercury sextile Mars. Now that's a more upbeat influence, Mercury sextile Mars. It's about being able to say what's on our mind. So if we feel that things are stuck, things aren't moving, then we can perhaps take advantage of this aspect. It might be heliocentric, but if we actually align ourselves to it, I think that we should be able to tell people what's bothering us and maybe get some kind of response. But yeah, things are heavy, and Pluto is at 1 degree 35 Aquarius. The Earth is moving towards a quincunx with Pluto. So that Earth quincunx Pluto is just going to make us feel that we are living in times of drama where things are intense, that things aren't necessarily going to be easy. And yeah, we do live in serious times. And serious times, people have suggested serious times. I've been reading in comments. People are suggesting that I should be relaxing for Christmas, and that Christmas is a special time when one can afford to just perhaps let go. Someone even suggests I had some tinsel, or I could wear a Father Christmas hat, maybe. That's just not me. I remember the best Christmas I ever had. The best Christmas I ever had, I was completely alone. It was just amazing. I had a whole Christmas of just no one around. It was Christmas 2001, I think it was. Or was it 2000? It was just alone. I was just alone. It was just the best Christmas ever. But maybe that's just me. Anyway, let's look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for this weekend, which is December the 21st and December the 21st and December the 22nd. So Aries, you start the weekend Moon in Virgo, and so with Moon in Virgo, you're going to be feeling a little bit sensitive. I mean, I suppose the Moon was in Virgo on Friday as well, so you still feel that you can't be your normal self. And the Moon in Virgo is also opposition Saturn, so it's just maybe, Aries, that you just feel that you haven't got the ability to fire on all cylinders. That maybe in terms of how you feel, for example, your health and your well-being, you just feel that you're not just feeling as good as you should, and maybe external influences are getting you down. So who are the people around you? What's the atmosphere like? It may not be perfect, and as a result, you might not quite know what to do. I suppose you could say that you need a certain amount of choice. Choice is always important. And if you are uncomfortable somewhere, then maybe you should find a way of quitting, going somewhere where you feel better. And I think it's going to be very important, Aries, that you're not necessarily tied to one place. And if we look at the structure of the T-square, which takes place on Saturday, we've got the Moon opposition Saturn, but it's got Jupiter on the T. So Jupiter's in Gemini, and Jupiter is providing the opportunity to you to move around, moving from place to place, maybe even from person to person. And so Jupiter may represent the resolution on Saturday. So if you feel on Saturday that really nothing is happening, or worse, that you just feel you're in a situation that is unhealthy, Jupiter is just saying, well, just don't get tied to it. Don't feel any sense of obligation. Just move from one place to another. Keep moving if necessary. And I'm not talking about moving huge distances, just making sure that you're able to circulate. In fact, circulation really does matter. I mean, that might be literal circulation, making sure there's a window open. I know it's pretty cold where I am in the Pacific Northwest, but it's not cold everywhere. Just having some flow, literal flow, can just make all the difference. At the same time, there's flow in terms of the social scene, and if something doesn't suit you, just move. I mean, that's the way Aries should be, of course. So in a way, you can just be yourself, and that is the way it can be. Now, the sun is changing sign. We do have the Winter Solstice, with the sun moving from Sagittarius to Capricorn, and it is the Capricorn season. And so for you, Aries, when the sun moves into Capricorn, it can often be a time of year which is quite motivating, and you feel that a new impulse to sort of get things together. And I suppose if you're looking at this from a perspective of your sun sign, I know people use these readings from a perspective of their moon sign or their ascendant sign, rising sign. But if you are looking at it from a perspective of your sun sign, then you might be starting to think ahead to your birthday in the spring, and perhaps you're thinking, well, now is the time to really get going on things, and let's perhaps see the first results in March or April or whenever your birthday is. So that might be one way in which this sun moving out of Sagittarius into Capricorn is working. And with sun moving into Capricorn, it just may feel that you've made up your mind about certain things, and you're ready. You've made your decision, and now is the time. And this weekend is the last quarter moon. So we had a full moon on December the 15th, and then we've got a new moon at the end of the month. And so last quarter moon, it may just feel that you have a final opportunity to get something together. And so this might mean, Aries, that you don't necessarily want to get too caught up on the seasonal festivities. It may be that there are things that you really feel that have to be done, and it doesn't matter what else is going on. You just want to consider the week ahead, the period between now and the new moon. So that this new moon is, there is a new moon, I should know, but the new moon is on, when's the new moon? The new moon is on December the 30th. So that new moon on December the 30th, so over the next 10 days, less than 10 days, it's more like just over a week between now and a new moon, you just maybe feel things that you just feel that you really want to get together. And so that might be how the solstice influences you, in which case we can perhaps start to see the moon in Virgo in a new light. It's not just about protecting yourself, it's also about preparation. And that's what moon in Virgo is very good at. And you could say that moon in Virgo opposition Saturn through Saturday and into Sunday is going to be a time when there are just things that need to be done. You know it's important because it just feels like you're preparing for something. And if that's the way you feel, then that's probably the right approach, because you want to take advantage of the sun moving into Capricorn. Taurus, things are getting earthy again. There has been an issue with not enough Earth in the sky, not enough planets in Earth signs. Uranus in Taurus just wasn't good enough. But now we've got the moon in Virgo, and this weekend we also have the sun moving into Capricorn. So we've got the sun and the moon in Earth signs. So from a Taurian perspective, I would have said that is good news. It means that you can ground yourself, and perhaps you can ground other people as well. And we've also got a last quarter moon, and so with a last quarter moon, there might be a sense in which you want to do something before it's too late. And this may relate to something of a creative nature. Perhaps there's something you want to do that might be fun, might be amusing, and you kind of feel that if you don't do it now, you might lose your chance. So this weekend, Taurus, I think ideally you would do something you enjoy, something that is very individualistic, and the more so because the moon in Virgo is making a trine to Uranus. So moon in Virgo trine Uranus in Taurus gives you the impetus to do something which is a fundamental expression of who you are. And you know what it is. It's very individual to you. It's not about anyone else. And you do it over the weekend, and I think you'll be very pleased, with the results. And with the sun moving into Capricorn, of course, the sun moves into Capricorn around this time every single year. But with the sun in Capricorn and the moon in Virgo, it's possibly a time when you should be looking beyond your material environment. I mean, you keep it grounded. I mean, that is important. I think that the earth matters for every Taurus, and though the sun in Capricorn is quite a spiritual influence, particularly that precise moment when the sun moves into Capricorn. And Taurians in many cases are surprisingly spiritual. I mean, you might think that Taurus is a sign which just focuses on what it can touch, on what is real. I mean, you can think of people who had apparently very little in the way of spiritual interests, like Adolf Hitler or Karl Marx or Lenin. Lenin was a Taurus, yeah. You can think of that side of Taurus, but there is a side to Taurus which is actually very spiritual. Most Taurians I've met are more spiritual than average. They want to be in touch with the earth not just in terms of money and matter, but the earth as a sort of a living entity, as something which has a spiritual dimension, and that might be something you can do with the sun in Capricorn. It does get you in touch with things, and perhaps having a feeling that the earth is talking to you. I mean, that is something that a lot of people have lost. Everything is disconnected as the planet gets destroyed, but you can get in touch with the earth, and perhaps the earth is trying to tell you something. And of course, the moment of the solstice is a moment of great spirituality, and I think it's a sense where you connect with everything. And yeah, that's something I will be talking about later in the video. But perhaps that's what you need to do, Taurus. I mean, I assume that you are one of those Taurians who is pretty spiritual. I mean, generally speaking, people who listen to astrology videos tend to be more spiritual than average. I mean, not that I'm the most spiritual person on the planet. I'm sort of, in some ways, I'm not particularly spiritual, but I think that is something, Taurus, that you can really get in touch with. And also, Taurus, I think you can actually get in touch with your fellow human beings. I think actually it's a very good weekend for doing that, particularly on Saturday. There's something about you that is down to earth. People want to see what you have to offer, and in many respects the thing you have to offer, Taurus, is just a sense of grounding, and that's something that you can certainly give. Gemini, I think that this weekend you probably are not really in the mood for doing much. It's a weekend after all, and the moon is in Virgo for most of the weekend, perhaps even all the weekend if you're in Asia, Australia, or New Zealand. So with the moon moving through Virgo, you may feel that the best thing to do is, just to stay at home. I mean, why else would you want to do anything else? Okay, there might be things that you have to do, but I don't think you're inclined for a lot of movement. And the moon in Virgo does make an opposition to Saturn, and so that moon opposition Saturn perhaps will be a little undermining, perhaps because you feel that there's some obligation that you just don't want to get involved with, but somehow you have to pay attention to it. I mean, you could try to ignore it, but if you ignore something, it's still there. It doesn't go away. And so with the moon opposition Saturn, there's something you need to pay attention to. You don't want to pay attention to. I mean, you can probably ignore it if you really want to, but it's probably not the right thing to do. So if someone asks you to do something, then you should probably do it, even if you really don't want to do it. Now, the moon is opposition Saturn on Saturday. We also have a T-square. So the moon is opposition Saturn, and Jupiter is on the T. In other words, we have Jupiter square Saturn and moon square Jupiter. And I think that Jupiter in Gemini is asking you to have good grace. I mean, there is a temptation, Gemini, to be overly negative, to do things but under protest and give that impression. I don't think that's the right approach. Jupiter in Gemini is asking you to be optimistic, particularly as it's square Saturn and the moon is square Jupiter as well, particularly because it's part of the T-square. It's asking you to be enthusiastic, to be optimistic, to see things in the best possible light, even if you don't feel like it. Yeah, it might seem pointless, why make things positive when they're not, when you don't feel particularly positive? But it does seem that if you make the effort, you will in some respects be rewarded, and people will appreciate it. And it is possible, Gemini, that you can take something which on the surface seems rather boring and something you don't want to get involved with, and you can transform it just by having a positive approach. I think that will be appreciated. Now, from a heliocentric viewpoint, Mercury is opposition Saturn this weekend, and I think into next week. And so Mercury opposition Saturn, yes, that does encourage you to be negative. And of course I've got my sun in Gemini, so I'm perhaps starting to be influenced by this negativity, and I certainly will be once I move into the weekend. But with Mercury opposition Saturn, you can make things difficult for yourself, and you can make things difficult for other people with your negativity. You can just pick up on the negativity of the universe. And you're right. There isn't much to be positive about. So you've got it right, but that doesn't mean to say you should tell people the truth. They don't want to hear the truth, not necessarily. And maybe you need to consider what ways we can employ to break free from this negativity. And so heliocentrically, the Mercury is not just opposition Saturn, it's also sextile Mars. And so Mercury sextile Mars is the invitation to be dynamic, to make things happen, to communicate in a way that is vibrant, even exciting. Even if you don't feel like it, you can do it. And geocentrically, of course, we've got that Jupiter in the first house, well, at least in the first house from a Gemini perspective, because from a Gemini perspective, the first house is Gemini. So you perhaps have to defy gravity this weekend. Maybe that's the task, Gemini. You see the way it is. You see that things are difficult, things are negative. Not for you in particular, but that's just the way things are. You can see that, and it's just so easy to just accept it and go with this negative flow. But in looking at what's happening astrologically, it seems that that's not necessarily the right thing to do. You can transform the situation, or at the very least, you can give a different spin to it, and you can see things in a more positive light. And that's what people want to hear. And I suppose I'm talking to myself here, aren't I, in some respects? And this is me being a little bit negative and just feeling I have to be more positive, because that's perhaps what the planets expect of me. So don't get fooled and caught up by your own negativity. It won't necessarily do you any good. And just consider the possibility that things aren't as bad as they seem, and by talking about things in a positive light, you can perhaps improve them. You can maybe even transform them. Cancer. Cancer, the moon is in Virgo most of the weekend, certainly all of the weekend if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Eastern Asia. And with the moon in Virgo, I think at the moment you have a good sense of detail. You understand things. There are going to be few things that you miss. So I think it's important that you are aware of what is happening, or at least you make a special effort to be aware, because you'll be noticing lots of things, and you'll be noticing things that other people can't see. I mean, I think I sort of mentioned this yesterday when I was doing the horoscope for Friday, and at the same time, you're going to be, I think, quite a good conversationalist. I think that people are going to listen to you, and the things you come up with are in some respects going to be exciting, certainly worth paying attention to, because we do have the moon making a trine to Uranus, and so moon represents you, the communicator. Uranus is the planet of surprises. It's a planet that is interesting. It can also be revolutionary, and so the things you say are certainly worth listening to. And so, don't hold back, especially if you're making a lot of phone calls, or if you're, I don't know, going to parties over the weekend. I don't know what your plans are, but you're able to make things a little more exciting with that moon trine Uranus. I mean, it's not necessarily super exciting. It's moon in Virgo, trine Uranus in Taurus. These are earth signs, but I think that you give the impression that things can be more interesting than they actually seem to be on the surface. And also, Cancer, it's probably a good idea not to restrict yourself to any one place. I mean, I think if you stay in one place for too long, you're going to feel a bit frustrated, and it will just seem that some opportunity is being denied to you. So if you can give yourself some variety over the weekend, I think that would be a very good thing. Now, on Saturday, the main aspect is an opposition between the moon and Saturn, and this opposition between the moon and Saturn may have some implications on relationships, because you could say that Saturn represents another person, could represent a partner, someone you care about, maybe someone you don't care about, someone you hate, but it's still someone you have to deal with. Moon opposition Saturn. And it does seem that some people could make you feel uneasy. And you may even feel that they're just restricting you and preventing you from doing what you feel you would like to do. And so be a little bit wary of one-to-one relationships. The other person might not be sympathetic to your needs, and they might even try to discount your opinions. And that's something you have to be aware of. Though the moon is not just making an opposition to Saturn, and the moon is also making a square to Jupiter. So moon opposition Saturn, moon square Jupiter, may indicate that there's going to be something rather stop-go about this weekend, especially Saturday. So moon square Jupiter is about taking things to the next step, wanting to take things further. Saturn is about restriction. So what do you go for? Do you restrict yourself, or do you explore? Do you move beyond those restrictions? And so there is that sense of tension with the moon aspecting both Jupiter and Saturn. And so what's the best way to deal with that? Well, you might just enjoy the variety of having that stop-go existence. But in the end, I think that the go should overwhelm the stop, because the moon first makes the opposition to Saturn, then it makes the square to Jupiter. So in the end, you find the way forward, you find the way to be free. And how do you find that? Well, I think with Jupiter and Gemini, the best way to be free is to withdraw at some stage. And maybe that's what you have to do constantly over the weekend. You take things as far as you can, but the moment you feel pressurized, the moment you feel perhaps taken for granted, you can withdraw, you can step back, you don't have to be part of things. So if you are part of something this weekend, you feel that you're part of something, it's not a permanent state of affairs, and you can just withdraw just like that. You don't have to apologize. You can step back, and it may well be, Cancer, that there are certain relationships that you want to step back from, at least temporarily, with that moon opposition Saturn. If someone is not respecting you, especially on Saturday, then you really don't have to put up with the situation. And as I just said, the moon is trine Uranus. I think the last major aspect that the moon makes, it makes an opposition to Neptune. I kind of think the moon trine Uranus is going to be more important than the moon opposition Neptune. On a day-to-day level, I do find that Uranus has a more powerful influence than Neptune. I mean, you may disagree with me there, but Neptune is kind of more subtle. And so the last majorly noticeable aspect before the moon leaves Virgo is that moon trine Uranus. And moon trine Uranus is about your capacity to do things differently. You don't have to be restricted to any one course of action. You don't have to be tied to any one social scene. Moon trine Uranus allows you to just make a change, to just move on. You can do it in an instant if that's what you want. So actually, Cancer, this weekend you have a great deal of freedom, but it might not feel like it. You might kid yourself into thinking there is no freedom. You have to accept what you've got. But don't get too caught up on that moon opposition Saturn, because the moon moves away from that opposition to Saturn. It makes a square to Jupiter, and then, most importantly, perhaps, it makes that trine to Uranus, and that's when you can really start to do your own thing. Especially if you feel there's pressure, you're not being respected enough. You really don't have to put up with it. Leo, there may be a certain financial emphasis this weekend, because the moon is moving through Virgo, and the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. So you've got moon opposition Saturn across the finance axis of your chart. And so it may well be that financial issues are of some concern to you. And you may feel that something is holding you back financially, and that as a result of financial concerns, you perhaps can't do everything you want to do. Or it may just be that you feel financially uncomfortable, but you go ahead with it anyway. So if you are spending money over the weekend, especially on Saturday, I don't think you're going to do it comfortably. You'll be asking yourself whether it's really the right thing to be doing. But at the same time, you have to, kind of. So there could be this rather annoying sense of financial obligation. I mean, I'm not sure what it is. I mean, maybe it's something seasonal, like, I don't know, to do with Christmas. You might want to buy people Christmas presents and on Saturday, and you don't really want to do it. You regard it as a waste of money at some level, but at another level, it's something you have to do. And maybe you even feel you have to buy Christmas presents or of a particular value. I mean, that is one possibility. But I think you don't want to take it too seriously. If money bothers you, which it could do, if excessive expenditure bothers you, then with moon opposition Saturn, you could say it's a great time for cutting back on expenditure. for being really tough about it. And the moon doesn't just make an opposition to Saturn, it makes a square to Jupiter. And the fact that you've got moon opposition Saturn and square Jupiter indicates that there's just something rather tense about it. Moon square Jupiter perhaps wants to be excessive. Moon opposition Saturn wants to be restrictive. And so you're not quite sure which way to go. One moment you're really worried about money, the next moment you're spending far too much money. So you probably have to think about it beforehand and think about how you're spending money over the weekend, again, especially on Saturday, and perhaps have a plan and ask yourself, what is reasonable, and be completely grounded about it, and don't give in to external pressure. I think you could give in to external pressure in terms of money, and perhaps that's something to do with Jupiter. The fact that Jupiter is asking you to go further, and Jupiter may represent friends, other people other people perhaps putting pressure on you to spend, and it's not the right thing, but you might want to give in to the pressure. But then on the other hand, Moon is opposition Saturn. So I think that while Moon opposition Saturn could be a rather difficult influence, the Moon opposition Saturn could actually do you a favour. It could allow you to cut back and to resist the temptation to overspend. Or better still, if we link Moon, Jupiter and Saturn, it may be a way in which you can spend your money in a more targeted way if you have to spend money, and perhaps get better value for money. And if you have the discipline to do that, I think that's certainly something you can do. Now, the Moon also makes a trine to Uranus, and that trine to Uranus again could be quite materialistic. It could be money orientated, but I think more in a fortunate sense. Moon trine Uranus might give you ideas about money, ideas that you hadn't had before, ideas about how to spend money and how to save money, and perhaps even how to make money. And that would especially be the case if you're of an entrepreneurial nature, just having an inspiration about how you could do something, how you could do something that could enrich you or give you more money, or might be an extra source of income. That is Moon trine Uranus, and it could just come from nowhere. And so, really trying to be positive about that aspect. I'm sorry to go on about money, because I do understand that some people couldn't care less about money, and some Leos couldn't care less about money. But if I look at the plain astrology of the situation, it does seem that money could be an issue this weekend, especially on Saturday. We also have the Sun moving into Capricorn. So the Sun is your ruler, it's moving into Capricorn, and so this is often a time of year where you start to calm down a little bit. You become maybe more grounded, and you want to do things properly, and maybe you just don't like surprises. And the Sun, as it moves into Capricorn, it is actually making a semi-sextile to Pluto. And so as the Sun moves into Capricorn, you're certainly aware of other people's influence, no doubt about that. And you might see there as existing perhaps some kind of a power struggle. And if you want to get the better of someone with this Sun semi-sextile Pluto, with the Sun moving into Capricorn, it may be that you just have to be very organized. And so you have to make sure that your own part of the world is completely in order. And that means it's going to be much easier to defend yourself. But maybe there's nothing to defend you, there's nothing or indeed no one to defend yourself against. It may be part of your imagination, but there is a certain heaviness in the air, and I think there's a heaviness in the air for everyone. These are serious times in which we're living, and so given the fact that we're living in serious times, then the best thing that you can do as a Leo is to just make sure that from your perspective you have control, that there are no mysteries, that everything is clear. And so sorting things out, I don't know, making sure that you've completed whatever bureaucratic tasks you need to do, doing that with sun moving into Capricorn, that is the right approach. And that way you're going to feel safer, more secure, and better able to deal with whatever comes at you, I don't know, at the end, the last part of the year and into 2026 as the sun moves into Capricorn. I'm not saying anything bad is going to happen. I mean, the sun goes into Capricorn every year, so it's not exactly an unusual event, but just maybe with Sun semisextile Pluto over the next few days, it might feel that, as far as you're concerned, that organization is the best form of defense. Virgo, for most of the weekend, indeed perhaps for all of the weekend, the moon is moving through your sign, and this movement on the face of it is pretty good. I mean, it's your time, you understand what's happening, you're at one with your environment, so that's certainly something to welcome. But with the moon moving through Virgo, we also have an opposition with Saturn. So we've got moon in Virgo, opposition Saturn in Pisces. And so that moon-Saturn opposition could be something of a problem, especially on Saturday. And it may be that in spite of your own efforts, things could just be messed up, perhaps by another person. It's very relationship orientated aspect, moon opposition Saturn. And so who could hold you up? Who could make things difficult for you? And what are you going to do about it? It may just be a question of preparation. But if you make too much of an effort to prepare things and you want things done absolutely right and you get all your preparations in order, someone else might come along and just mess things up. So don't be too organized. Don't make too many assumptions about what is going to be happening over the weekend, because something or someone might mess things up. So rigidity would not be your friend, and things shouldn't be rigid. The moon is in a mutable sign. You are a mutable sign, so you need to have that flexibility. Now, the moon is not just making an opposition to Saturn, it is making a square to Jupiter. And that square to Jupiter, I think, it comes right after the opposition to Saturn. So you have moon opposition Saturn, then an hour later you have moon square Jupiter. And so that Jupiter, to my mind, represents the way forward. And Jupiter Jupiter in Gemini is about your ambitions. It's about what you're trying to achieve, what your plans are. And moon opposition Saturn it's saying that if you get your preparations right, then you are giving yourself a major boost. You prepare something, it's hard work. You may be in the short term don't get much thanks for it, but if you can prepare it in such a way that you can deal with a little bit of disruption, you've got that flexibility, then it becomes something that really starts to work in your favor with that Jupiter moon making a square to Jupiter square Saturn as well. So on Saturday, I think it can be a day where things are difficult, But at the same time, it can just be a time when you can really find what you're looking for. You can get a sense of what you're supposed to be doing. And it's all about that Jupiter. And Jupiter's in Gemini. Jupiter's in a high-profile part of your chart. Jupiter will remain in Gemini until May of next year. So perhaps with that configuration, because we've got Moon opposition Saturn with Jupiter on the T, I think I would have said this is perhaps an example of how you can get yourself together and how you can deal with pressure and deal with disruptive forces in a way that is constructive, and you can take a situation which is difficult and you can perhaps dramatically improve it. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, Moon is opposition Saturn. We can't get away from it, and that aspect is, it's exact on Saturday. So perhaps Saturday should not be a day for worrying too much about other people, especially particular individuals. You might think they're important. You might want to give them your time, but it's not going to be worth it, I don't think. And you may find that if you give people a chance, they could spoil your weekend, but they needn't spoil your weekend, provided you're properly prepared and you don't take any one person too seriously. Libra, you feel that maybe you don't have to be around, that there just is no point. I mean, other people have their own priorities, and that's fine, but do you have to be part of it? And especially with the sun moving into Capricorn, it's the solstice, and the solstice has an impact on different people in different ways. And from a Libran view, the solstice can actually encourage you to close things down. There's this line in the I Ching, or I forget which hexagram it is, and it talks about some Chinese emperor what's done at the time of the solstice, I suppose particularly the winter solstice, and you close everything down. You close all the routes in. The roads get closed. Why would you want to do that? Because it's a time of silence. It's a time of absolute peace, absolute relaxation, when for a moment everything stops. And that is what is kind of happening at the time of the solstice. Because if you think about it, Libra, the sun is reaching its peak declination, whether it's above the equator, if you're well, it depends on your perspective, whether it's from the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, where it's just stopping. It's coming to a standstill. That's what the solstice is about. And so that is a time to do nothing. It is that moment of silence. And I think, Libra, that is how you should see it. There's absolutely nothing, I don't think, that has to be done. The work perhaps is working on an inner level. Just thinking about how you relate to everything going on around you. And of course, Libra is a sign which is connected with the balance. It's all about being balanced. And if you want to be balanced, Libra, there are just going to be times when you're going to have to just withdraw and just observe and get yourself back into sync with everything. And I do think that that's the best way of dealing with the weekend and with the solstice. And there may be challenges that you feel that really need to be addressed, but I don't think they need to be addressed this weekend. Especially on Saturday. As you move into Sunday, I think we do start to get a little more movement. For a start, the moon is moving into very late Virgo, and indeed in some places the moon will move into Libra, into your sign. So if you're in Europe, on Sunday evening the moon moves into Libra. In the Americas, that will be more sort of this afternoon, or maybe late morning on Sunday. So there could be a change as the moon moves into your sign. Okay, it could be on Sunday, it could be into Monday. When that happens, you'll perhaps feel that moment of quiet is over. It's kind of like a sort of a one-day silence. It's not about commemorating anything, but it's just a respect for your time, and it's your place in the world, and that silence is needed. And so as Saturday turns into Sunday, the silence comes to an end, and there starts to be more action, and then you can start to perhaps reintegrate with everything. So from a broad level, I would have thought that is the right approach. And the moon, though, does make a trine to Uranus, and that moon trine Uranus, in a way, is quite personal. It's not something that has to be discussed, but you might feel it, and it could be quite inspiring, or it might just be an idea you get. So in that silence, as the silence comes to an end, as your mind starts to move, as you start to think about possibilities, something just occurs to you, and it seems very appropriate, and it may relate to what you want to do. You may suddenly decide that there's something you want to do with moon trine Uranus. You don't have to do it immediately, but it just occurs to you that something is actually a really good idea, and it's very much about you. It's not an idea that you've copied from someone else. It's very original, and at the same time it's very personal. At least it's personal to begin with, and perhaps you need to take this idea and perhaps over the next few days sort of work with it and see how you can actually put it into practice. Scorpio, you might find that you do have to deal with people. And I use the word deal. Dealing with people suggests something that isn't entirely easy. It's rather like handle. Some people have to be handled. You have to handle the situation. It's a situation that isn't perfect, but it still needs to be managed. And I think, Scorpio, that is something you can do. And so, yes, there are people to deal with. Are you going to be happy about it? Probably not. But you will manage. And I think that somehow you'll be able to keep your cool, because I don't think that you're in a tremendously good mood at the moment, and especially on Saturday, because the moon makes that opposition to Saturn, and so if you mix with people, if you're with people, you just might in some ways be a little bit disappointed, or you might find that you're being held back, and I think that's a problem wherever you are this weekend. I think you'll always prefer to be somewhere else, unless you're at home. Even when you're at home, you probably prefer to be somewhere else. So I don't think that you're going to be entirely comfortable, entirely satisfied this weekend. And so I think it's just important to show some toleration, but always be aware of how to get out, because nothing needs to be permanent, and you shouldn't feel that something is restricting you all day long, that all weekend long. It needn't happen. And don't be afraid of telling people what's on your mind. And that may be part of the problem. If you don't tell people what's on your mind, then you're just going to feel frustrated. I mean, you might be afraid of what happens if you tell people what's on your mind, but if you do tell people what's on your mind, and if you're completely honest about it, I actually think that you'll get a fairly sympathetic reception. Now, arguably, the big event this weekend is the solstice, the sun moving into Capricorn. So on Saturday, sun goes into Capricorn, and it straight away makes a semi-sextile to Pluto. So sun goes into Capricorn obviously every year. So it's not a super common event, but it's a very regular event. And so with the sun moving into Capricorn, it can be a time when Scorpios feel that they need a little bit of variety, gentle variety, just keeping on the move. I said that you're not going to be satisfied wherever you are. So with the sun moving into Capricorn, that just indicates that you can perhaps just move from place to place. You don't have to be restricted to one place, and you don't have to be also restricted to one idea. So ideas, it can be what people are talking about. You might find that one group of people only want to talk about one thing, and you're not so interested in it. So you perhaps need to move somewhere else where you can, where you perhaps have a better chance of getting your ideas out into the open. So that's perhaps the best way of dealing with this weekend. I don't think that this weekend is going to be particularly spectacular. It doesn't seem like it. I don't think you're going to feel entirely comfortable. I think that it just might always seem that the grass is greener somewhere else. But I mean, don't worry. It's just one weekend. I don't think anything terribly bad is going to happen. The moon does make a trine to Uranus. That's perhaps the highlight of the weekend. Moon trine Uranus does indicate that you need to give people a chance. You're not really inclined to give people much of a chance, but you might go somewhere and it just might seem that absolutely nothing is going on and you want to leave. But then Moon trine Uranus perhaps represents a last-minute piece of excitement or a last-minute event. Suddenly things moving in a way that you weren't expecting. And it's possible from a relationship perspective with Moon trine Uranus that you are surprised to the upside. Perhaps you're talking to someone or you know about someone and you're not impressed with them, but somehow something happens and perhaps you are impressed. So Scorpio, give people a chance and don't write people off immediately. Just give them perhaps that extra minute, 5 minutes of your time, and in those last few minutes they may show a side to their personality that you weren't expecting. Sagittarius, this weekend you are in your own way quite ambitious. I don't know what ambition means to you, but you feel that you can do something of significance and perhaps even of a lasting impact. And at the same time, Sagittarius, you want to get it right, and so you're trying your hardest, and your work ethic, I think, is quite good. I mean, you don't have to necessarily work this weekend, but I don't think you're lazy. Yet there may be some disruptions, particularly on Saturday, because on Saturday we've got the moon opposition Saturn. And so moon opposition Saturn, it just may be that, something happens that is just annoying. Things you thought perhaps you'd left behind suddenly maybe rear their ugly head and you have to deal with them. I mean, it could be pressure from your family. I think at the moment, in a broad general sense, home and family is an issue. It is important to you, but at times it can weigh on you and sort of restrict your freedom. And perhaps with the moon opposition Saturn, that might be how it feels. And if it's not your family, then it's going to be just someone else, someone wanting your attention. And you don't want to give them your attention, but somehow you have to give them your attention. So that's a little bit annoying. But the moon in Virgo does make a trine to Uranus. So the moon on Saturday makes an opposition to Saturn, and then having made that opposition to Saturn, it makes a square to Jupiter, and then finally it makes a trine to Uranus. And so moon trine Uranus, it does make an aspect to Neptune as well. I think it makes an opposition to Neptune, and that's probably something I need to talk about as well. So moon trine Uranus, moon opposition Neptune. Well, continuing with the family, home and family thing, moon opposition Neptune, because we've got both Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Your family and your home, I think, could be undermining in the end with moon opposition Neptune. You spend too much time focusing on your family's interests, on domestic needs and supposed needs. Someone perhaps trying to make you feel guilty. You spend too much time on that, and you just get distracted. You don't know what's going on, and you just lose your sense of direction. So matters connected with home and family, Sagittarius, you don't want to allow them to completely take over. And I know there is a risk of that happening because it is a weekend, because it's just before Christmas. But I think you do need a certain sense of boundaries here. But the moon trine Uranus could be quite inspired and surprisingly inspiring. And maybe, Sagittarius, it's all about you doing things your way, persistently doing your things way. You're doing things your way. You ignore outside distractions, and by getting everything in the right place, you start to see a broader picture, and you actually have a certain sense of inspiration. And there is maybe something a little bit ritualistic about this moon trine Uranus. We talk about the solstice, and the solstice is often connected with rituals, and rituals is maybe about everything being in the right place. It's like a sort of spiritual combination lock. You organize your world in such a way, and when you get the configuration exactly right, then you align with the universe. And so you align with the universe, and the universe aligns with your ambitions, and it's all in place. And it only has to be in place for a split second, and then you get it, and then things really start to move for you. Perhaps because you're attracting some kind of energy, some energy from, I don't know, out there in the universe, perhaps some supernatural energy. But get it right, put everything in the right place, and maybe you'll see something really quite special starting to happen. Capricorn, it's a special time of year because the sun is moving into your sign, and of course for the next month it stays there. So it feels that you've kind of arrived. You've been waiting for this to happen for a long time, but finally it's there. The Capricorn season has started, and so you're able to be yourself, you feel comfortable, and you're helped by the fact that the moon is in Virgo. So the moon went into Virgo, I think, on Friday, and moon in an earth sign. And now that the sun is in Capricorn as well, we've got the sun and the moon in earth signs. And so the overall environment is now much more favorable to Capricorns. And you're going to, I think, be sort of more confident than you have been of late. And you just feel that, you know, whatever was holding you back has now gone, or is at least moving into the background and isn't quite so important. So Capricorn, don't be afraid to move forward with your ideas and your ambitions, and don't let things or people get you down. And that really does matter. I mean, maybe you've been a little bit too responsible recently. Perhaps you've been focusing too much on other people's needs, but now it's all about your needs. Still, when the sun moves into Capricorn, I suppose I need to point out that it does make a semi-sextile to Pluto. And I'm not convinced that semi-sextiles are a particularly fortunate aspect. I don't think they're necessarily that bad, but they can be quite challenging. And so, as the sun moves into Capricorn, you may be aware of a financial challenge, and that's represented by Pluto in Aquarius. Now, I don't think it's a kind of challenge where, you know, you risk losing things, or there's a dramatic change in your financial circumstances. I think it's more about awareness, and you thinking perhaps about your money in a longer term sense over the weekend, and thinking that actually a change may be necessary. It's not a change that you do overnight. It's a change that has to be thought about and has to be developed. But that might be how the sun semisextile Pluto is working. And at the same time, it's important to be imaginative, you know, especially on Saturday. You know, the moon is in Virgo, and moon in Virgo from a Capricorn perspective is a time that can be very spiritual, when you're aware of something beyond yourself, beyond your boundaries. And of course it is the solstice, and the solstice is a magical time. That precise moment when the sun moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, and because the moon is in Virgo, I think that you're able to really tune into it. So on Saturday, particularly around the time of the solstice, you know, try to give yourself some space. You know, I don't know. It depends where you are when that solstice happens. I mean, if you're in London, the solstice happens at 9:20 in the morning, which is a very decent time for the solstice to happen. Now, if you're in New York, for example, or the Eastern Coast, that would be much earlier. I'm afraid that would be 4:20 in the morning. So I don't know what your plans are for 4:20 in the morning, but if you're really keen, you might want to wake up at 4:20 in the morning and tune into the solstice. You don't really want to sleep through the solstice, do you? Well, I suppose I don't want to encourage you to wreck your night's sleep, but Saturday is a special time, and even if you miss the precise moment of the solstice, it's a time when you can realign, when you can kind of get an idea about, you know, what the universe is asking you to do. You know, Capricorns do, I know, have a reputation, a completely unfair reputation, for being just focused on themselves and their own material interests, but that's not true. In my experience, many Capricorns, maybe even most Capricorns, tend to have a sense of responsibility to their society, to the world, to the earth. And I think it's perhaps because Capricorns, they recognize that life is finite. You can have all the money in the world, but you're going to die. I mean, it's going to happen. And Capricorns perhaps recognize that more than most signs. And so they're thinking, with this brief time that you have, what are you going to do? How are you going to leave your mark? And indeed, how are you going to be able to behave responsibly to the society in which you live? And I think, particularly on Saturday, that is something you really need to give some thought. And perhaps you're going to get some encouragement, or perhaps you're going to get a command. Perhaps the universe is going to tell you that, hold on, you need to be doing something. You need to be putting more effort into something. And so, Capricorn, be sensitive, be aware, and perhaps understand what your duty is. And of course, it's not for me to tell you what your duty is. That's a matter between you and the universe. Aquarius. Aquarius, this may be a time for you of contemplation, perhaps, as the sun changes sign, as the sun moves out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn. And you know that sooner or later the sun will go into Aquarius. I mean, the sun will go into Aquarius at the end of January, but for the next month, the sun is going into Capricorn. Capricorn, all things being equal from an Aquarian perspective, is quite a low-profile sign. It's actually quite a secretive sign. And, I don't know how you spent this, you spent this time of year in usually, but I think if you think about it, there's not so much that needs to be said. And perhaps some things need to be worked on, they need to be planned. You don't need to tell anyone about it. And the time will arrive at the end of January when you can start to be more open. But just right now, I don't think there's so much you want to say. And on a short-term level, we've got the moon moving through Virgo. So with the moon moving through Virgo, Aquarius, you're not really in the mood for being particularly open. You're not really even going to want to get into the sort of the spirit of the season and all this kind of stuff. There are things you want to work out on your own, certainly through Saturday, probably into Sunday as well. Okay, the moon does change sign late on Sunday or into Monday. The moon moves into Libra, and that does create a change for you. But at the moment, there is an emphasis on doing things secretly and not feeling you have to tell people about what you're planning. I mean, that doesn't mean to say that you can't have an impact. You certainly actually can have an impact if you want to be dramatic. Yeah, you can be. And you might be helped by the fact that the moon is trine Uranus. So moon trine Uranus can be inspired, but that inspiration is still going to be private, I think, in most cases. It's going to be something that you feel. You have an awareness of the way things are moving. You perhaps have an awareness that you actually want to make some changes over the weekend. So that might actually happen. You perceive that things are not entirely right, and with moon trine Uranus, you're thinking, okay, you understand that something has to happen, but things can't happen. But things can't continue as the way they have done in the past. So with moon trine Uranus, you're ready to enact those changes. But this weekend, I don't really think that there's a great deal that you have to do. Pisces, there is a opposition aspect between the Moon and Saturn. And that Moon opposition Saturn could be a little bit of a problem because, you've got Saturn in Pisces, your sign, Moon in Virgo, your opposite sign, and in terms of relationships, that could indicate a little bit of strife, that your way of doing things is not the same as other people's way, and at the same time you can come over as something of an authority figure. You have control, and I think there's no doubt about that, and your control is obvious, but not everyone may appreciate it. They may feel that you're just too much. Do you care? Perhaps you don't. I think Pisces this weekend, there just may be a temptation to just do things your way, do things what you want, perhaps be a little bit selfish, and if other people don't like it, well, that's their problem. And yes, Pisces, I do think it's a weekend where you can be strong and uncompromising if you want to be. And yeah, you do have to consider what impact you're having on other people, because the impact might be substantial. So if relationships are important to you, I suppose in that case you do need to consider how you're behaving and how you're occurring to people. And there's a possibility on Sunday that you actually have a cause of confusion. People just don't know how to deal with you. There's just something about you that is strange. I mean, not that you are strange, just something about you that they can't quite figure out. So they respond in one way, and it's not really the right way. And so it might just be that other people appear a little bit clumsy around you. And the reason they're appearing clumsy is because they just don't know how to behave. And that means perhaps that you should have a certain amount of toleration of other people's failings, because I think these failings by and large are going to be fairly short term. Now, we do have the Sun moving into Capricorn, and so the Sun moves into Capricorn every year, same time of year, and with the Sun moving into Capricorn, it can be a time when Pisceans become more sociable. I mean, this weekend you're probably not particularly sociable. I mean, if you try to be sociable, you might get yourself into a situation that, or rather, you might encourage other people to get themselves into a situation because they don't know how to deal with you. So although this weekend socially is not great, I don't think, in a general sense, the Sun does stay in Capricorn for a month. With the Sun moving through Capricorn, you are going to be sociable, more sociable than usual. It's kind of your time of year in a social sense. So do take the opportunity to enjoy other people's company. They have got something to offer, and it's perhaps a time when you should try to be sort of more tolerant than usual, try to go with the flow, but at the same time, don't forget your priorities. And I suppose with Sun moving through Capricorn, this is perhaps a time when you can consider lots of different people, what their role is in your life, and perhaps how they can be of assistance if you give them the chance. And having done my forecast of the 12 signs, I want to consider the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 48, which is the well. And so the well represents something which is always there. Doesn't matter. We always need wells. Thousands of years ago, we needed wells. The well is just always there. And it represents a source of nourishment. And we can't live without water, can we? And so the well represents perhaps a permanent part of our personality, or it just could represent a permanent part of our community. It's got to be there. If it's not there, the community dies. For us, if we lose our well, what can we do anymore? So the well really does matter. And the well has two moving lines. Two moving lines which in this case are quite contradictory. Don't worry, the story has a good ending, don't worry. But the bottom line of the well does indicate wasted talent. So we've got something which is really, really important and fundamental to us, but we're not using it properly. Not really. We're frittering away this talent, and there may almost be a sense of something being abandoned. So a well is there, it's providing water, it's providing sustenance, but if you abandon that well, things go wrong. The well starts to clog up, debris starts to fall into the well, you start getting mud forming in the water, all this kind of thing. And in the end, I suppose it becomes useless. And so we have to think about that in terms of ourselves. There may be an ability that we have that we've stopped using, and we're allowing it to decay away. And the I Ching is telling us that we've got to get ourselves together. We're wasting something. So that's the first point. That's the first moving line. Then the fifth line moves. The fifth line tends to be a fortunate line. And I think in this sense it is quite fortunate. It talks about clear water. And it talks about clear water which has potential. And in fact, the I Ching says potential, but it's not going to regard itself as being fortunate, because potential on its own is not fortunate. It depends what you do with it. And so with the fifth line moving, regardless of what we have abandoned, we can have perhaps another look at what we have abandoned, what has been abandoned. And when we have another look at it, we see something that is in good shape, but could be in good shape. It doesn't need much to get it back on form. And so there is clear water there, but the question is, are we going to make the most of it? Are we going to use our potential? It's our choice. We don't necessarily have to. Now, because we've got two moving lines, that does mean that this hexagram moves, and it moves to a different hexagram, and it moves to hexagram number 12, which is peace. It's a hexagram which is at peace with itself. We've got three broken lines at the top, three unbroken lines at the bottom. Everything is in the right place. And so what we have to do is we have to fix the well. I think the well does need to be repaired. It has been abandoned to an extent. There are some things which we're good at, some things we should have been really respecting about ourselves. Maybe about other people, I suppose. It could be. I think it's more likely to be about ourselves. It's something we haven't looked after. We've been complacent, or we've given up on something. We get it together, and we start to realize that potential, and then we regard ourselves as having done a good job, and perhaps then we can start to move to the sense of peace and feeling that we've done the right thing. Everything is in order. And we can start being sort of optimistic about the future because we've sorted ourselves out. And now I want to transition to the solstice. So we do have the winter solstice this weekend. In the southern hemisphere, I suppose it's the summer solstice, kind of, isn't it? So the solstice is, of course, the time where we have an extreme situation in terms of daylight hours. In the northern hemisphere, it is the shortest day. Southern hemisphere, it is the longest day. And the solstice happens at a precise moment. It's not some general thing. I mean, I know some people like to have solstice parties because at a convenient time, I don't know, Saturday night, but that might be too late. The moment does matter. I mean, it matters from a symbolic and sort of a ritualistic view. And if you want to mark that moment, because at that precise moment, so let me just show you the precise moment. So here is the precise moment when the sun moves into Capricorn. So this is London time. So in London, December the 21st, Saturday, 9:20 a.m. I mean, this program says 9:19 a.m. So perhaps, I don't know how accurate this program is, whether it really is 9:19 a.m. One perhaps would have to do some research on that, but this program says 9:19 a.m., but it's around sort of 9:20 a.m. That's a precise moment when the sun moves into Capricorn. And as astrologers, we use the tropical zodiac. We're focused on the seasons. Constellations are not part of it. And it is that moment when the sun reaches its maximum southerly declination. It doesn't go any further south. So if I look at the ephemeris, I can see that the sun just comes to a standstill at a declination of 23 degrees 26 minutes south, and it kind of comes to a standstill at that point. But 9:20 a.m. is that moment. So if you wanted to commemorate the solstice, hit that precise moment, well, it's very convenient if you're in London, because 9:20 in the morning is great. That's a very civilized time. Okay, it might be too early if you like to stay in bed on Saturday. That's a little bit early, but 9:20 is a good time. Now, if you're in New York, not so good, is it? Because it's at 4:20 in the morning, so you're going to have to get up early if you want to commemorate the solstice. And if you're in California, that would be 1:20 a.m. So that, I suppose, means sort of going to bed late. If you're in Europe, in Paris or Germany, that's not so bad. 10:20, that's very civilized. So I think in terms of convenient times, I think it's kind of a little bit difficult if you're in the Americas, but in other parts of the world, it shouldn't be a problem. If you want to know about, when the sun moves into Capricorn in other parts of the world, you can ask in the comments, and I'll try to reply to that. But so, from a ritualistic point of view, what does that mean? Well, from a ritualistic point of view, it's just like a gateway opening. When you just see what the universe is presenting, and that may say something about the next 3 months. So we could say that we should actually look at the structure of the planets at the time of the solstice to sort of get an idea about what the solstice is about. So in terms of what we can see by eye, without going into the midpoints of it, okay, sun is at 0 degrees Capricorn, obviously. There is at the time of the solstice an opposition between the moon and Saturn, and that's quite a close opposition, and that makes me think that there is something rather difficult about this solstice. Moon opposition Saturn, things are not moving as they should be. And so Moon is at 13 degrees 9 Virgo, moving to an opposition of Saturn at 13 degrees 48 Pisces. So should you commemorate the solstice? If you commemorate the solstice, you will be channeling, that precise moment when the gateway is opening. This is what you'll be channeling. You'll be channeling a Moon opposition Saturn. Is that something you want to channel? I mean, it may be that that's not an energy you want to have around, so maybe you should skip the solstice, at least in a sort of ritual sense, because of a Moon opposition Saturn. And that may say something also about what's happening in the world, perhaps happening over the world over the next 3 months. Some real restrictions and hurdles are going to manifest, perhaps over the next 3 months, between perhaps now and the equinox. Certainly over the next 6 weeks, I would have said, because I think there's an argument for having the 6 weeks, because after 6 weeks the sun is semi-square the sun. So that's right, the sun, when the sun is at 15 Aquarius, which would be in early February, but certainly between now and early February, things might not move as fast as we'd like them to move. And we do have to think about the economy, because Jupiter is square Saturn. So Jupiter is pretty close to the square of Saturn. That square is exact on December the 24th, I think. And I'll try to talk more about that aspect next week. But Jupiter and Saturn together are very much connected with the business cycle. And so we had the new moon we had Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 2000. In a way, that was the sort of new moon kind of event for Jupiter and Saturn. But now Jupiter square Saturn, we're seeing the crisis. And by crisis, I don't mean some ghastly economic meltdown. It's like the economic cycle that started in 2000, and we had COVID, and I suppose the Ukraine war as well. It has just devastated many countries, for example, Germany. So Jupiter-Saturn is a crisis. And it's happening just as Trump gets into office. But it's a crisis that I suspect is going to be dealt with. I don't think we're talking about economic meltdown here. And very often the period when you have a Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which starts with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, you have that crisis with the square, but from the square to the opposition, the economy often really picks up. You think about the late 60s, the late 2000s, from say the Iraq War, the end of the Iraq War in 2003 through to 2007. Certainly you had quite a few good years around the time of the waxing Jupiter-Saturn square. But still, we're starting to see in the short term some of the impact of that Jupiter-Saturn square. For example, Jerome Powell, he reduced interest rates by 1/4 point, but he said he wasn't going to have many. He was only going to have 2 or 3 interest rate reductions in 2026, in 2025, and that crashed the market, crashed cryptocurrencies, and all of a sudden there was a sense of gloom, and I think that represents it, the Jupiter-Saturn square. I do think it's going to be relatively short-lived, and don't forget Jupiter. Jupiter is weak at the moment. Jupiter is a planet of expansion. It's in retrograde. It's in Gemini. Okay, it's in mutual reception with Mercury, but it's not going to be mutual reception with Mercury forever. So Jupiter is in a weakened state. Certainly until it goes direct. When does Jupiter go direct? So Jupiter goes direct quite soon, I think. Jupiter goes direct 4th of February. So that's again what I was perhaps suggesting, that maybe economically, and of course economically things could be a little bit difficult between now and early February, between at least until the Sun semi-squares Sun. Don't treat this as financial advice. This channel is for entertainment purposes only. But anyway, the Jupiter-Saturn square is locked into the solstice chart, and to give us a better idea about the solstice, we can treat this as a 90-degree dial. And so there is the solstice, and so the 90-degree dial, there's the Aries point. The sun is square 0 degrees Aries, so the sun and the Aries point are together. And the aspect that comes to mind is the fact that we have this Mars-Uranus midpoint. So the sun is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, the Aries point is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and it's happening anyway. It's something that is going on at the moment, and it's kind of locked into the solstice chart. So that might indicate a little bit of aggravation, violence. It's not exact though, that Mars-Uranus. So I think that perhaps what's more important is the fact that the solstice happens at the time when there's a Moon-Saturn conjunction, and I think that Moon-Saturn conjunction may cast a shadow over the beginning of next year. But I think only the beginning of next year. I don't see the issues of the solstice continuing right through the year, because I think, in a broader sense, I think this is a time of somehow growth, at least in America. I just don't see everything collapsing in the United States between now and a Jupiter-Saturn opposition. I mean, I may be wrong. Again, I'm not giving financial advice. So the solstice works in different ways in different places, and so I want to just quickly look at the astrocartography. So the theory is that you need to look at where the planets lie in different parts of the world. So if we do astrocartography, here, a map of the world, and the sort of the places to look out for. So so here you see this red line here. These are all the places where the sun is exactly on the midheaven at the precise time of the solstice. So you can see that goes through Moscow, and it goes through eastern Syria, and goes down through here. So that might be a part of the world to consider. I mean, I have set the chart up for Moscow, and I'll be showing that in a moment. And then there's that Moon-Saturn. Remember that Moon-Saturn opposition, which is exact at the time of the solstice. So here we can see parts of the world where the moon is opposition Saturn across the angles. You can see that going through eastern Ukraine, also going through Turkey. I wonder about Turkey, and particularly in light of what's been happening in Syria, I think that things may be more difficult than we imagine for Turkey. But don't worry, I'll be looking at that in a moment. And of course, the UK, things are always bad in the UK, or at least so I've been told. So at the time of the solstice, the exact time of the solstice, Uranus is exactly on the IC in London and Paris. So those are some places to consider. So let's now look at those charts. So I'll start with London. So this is a chart for Westminster, and at the precise moment when the sun moves into Capricorn in London, Uranus was on the IC, or Uranus will be on the IC, and it just represents more trouble. I think that the foundations of the country are just being undermined all the time, and the Starmer government is going to be in power for 4 years. So it's a bit of a zombie government, isn't it? I mean, it's a government that is dead, but is not dead because this government doesn't have to face an election until 2029. And I think that's what we're going to see. And of course, if we're talking about Britain's immediate future, we know that Saturn and Neptune are about to move into Aries. And I think that Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries is going to be very undermining for the Starmer government. The reason for that is because if you look at the precise moment when Starmer became Prime Minister, which is here, by the way, we had the descendant at 2 degrees 41 Aries. So Saturn and Neptune are moving on to the descendant, and so it's not great for the UK. And so this chart here just tells us something about the UK over the next month and more with Uranus on the IC. Just, it doesn't stop, does it? And you got Mars in the 7th. I mean, not exactly in the 7th, but that may be referring to Britain's enemies, perhaps. But I will be looking at Britain more. I mean, nice to see that Moon-Saturn opposition right on the 2nd 8th house cusp. So public finances may not be great in the UK, and they may not be great in terms of people feeling that they've got money. People are going to feel that they haven't got money through inflation and other reasons. And of course, the elderly in Britain have been denied their winter fuel payments, which is a reason why it has been a problem one reason why things have been problematic for the UK. And then there's been other issues. This group of pensioners, female pensioners, I think born in the 50s, who have been denied this pension, and Starmer promised them that the matter would be resolved, and it hasn't been resolved, and this has really undermined the government in a very serious way. So London is quite close to Paris, and so here is a chart for Paris. And so Paris, like London at the time of the solstice, has Uranus on the IC. Not quite as close as it is for London, but I think that the solstice could be quite undermining for France. And we already know that Macron is in all sorts of trouble. He can't form a government, and I need to look at the new Prime Minister, Bayou, and he's trying to negotiate with Marine Le Pen. He's promising proportional representation, but Macron is seriously on the ropes, and there's a question about whether he's not going to actually get through his full presidency. I don't think a presidential election is due until 2027, so he can continue in theory, but he's becoming increasingly unpopular. And with Uranus on the ICs, like Britain, so it is with London and Paris, it really is a tale of two cities, because astrologically, in terms of astrocartography, it seems that they are experiencing similar events. Other places, Moscow. Here's the solstice for Moscow. Sun is on the midheaven. You might see that perhaps as quite a good thing. I mean, quite favourable for Russia in terms of the pursuit of its war against NATO. So that perhaps is quite good. Neptune is on the ascendant, though, and Neptune on the ascendant may represent a bit of uncertainty there. I mean, I suppose when you see Neptune, when you're talking about countries at war, you think of the sea, you see shipping disasters, warships being sunk. At the beginning of the war, you had the Moskva being blown up, and that was a major blow to the country's naval prestige. So Neptune on the ascendant, but Neptune on the ascendant may just be about a country not being quite clear about where it's going, and perhaps maybe being a little bit deceptive. Then moving a little further west rather, we can look at the solstice for Ukraine. Ukraine, that moon opposition Saturn does hit the ascendant. Not exactly. You have to go to East Ukraine, further east from Kiev, to see Saturn exactly on the ascendant and the moon exactly on the descendant. But I do think that there could be a certain amount of disappointment in Kiev, in Ukraine, that things are just not really moving very well, and that is perhaps an indication that the war is not going to go their way. I mean, we already know it's not going their way, but that's perhaps confirmed by the Moon-Saturn opposition. And another place is Damascus. Damascus is on the same longitude as Moscow, roughly. So it's a similar chart to Moscow. You've got Sun on the midheaven. I suppose Sun on the midheaven, optimism, new government, Neptune on the ascendant. What kind of strange things are going on? It's very difficult to work out what's happening in Syria. Now, one country that we perhaps need to think about is Turkey, because in terms of the invasion of the invasion of Syria, the two winners are perhaps seen as being Israel and Turkey. I mean, Israel is a major winner, but Turkey, it's got what it wanted. It's defeated the regime in Syria. But what now? I think astrologically, Turkey is starting to realize that maybe it's bitten off more than it can chew. What's it going to do? Is it going to send troops into Syria? It might find that its militias come in conflict with Kurdish militias, and those Kurdish militias are supported by the US. It might be just too much for Turkey. And looking at the astrocartography, let's relocate the chart to Ankara. I think the Istanbul chart is more powerful, but if we look at the chart for Ankara, you see in Ankara, Saturn is quite close to the ascendant. Neptune is quite close to the ascendant as well. You've sort of got the ascendant widely on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, and the moon is on the descendant. So that suggests a little bit of trouble for Turkey. It may not be a particularly easy time for Turkey. And then we look at Erdogan's chart. This is the final chart I want to look at. I've looked at his chart before, and I just want to compare Erdogan's chart. I don't have Erdogan's time of birth, but I just wanted to compare Erdogan's chart with the solstice chart, and so put Erdogan's chart in the middle, and we put the solstice chart on the outer wheel. So Erdogan has a Mercury-Venus conjunction at 13 Pisces, and he's got Venus at 1355 Pisces. So Saturn has been going over his Mercury and his Venus, and I know that Erdogan has been somewhat triumphalist about it, has been showing how great things are, that what's happened in Syria. But I'm just wondering what's happening under the surface. I don't think things are necessarily that great for Erdogan. I mean, Erdogan, sorry about my pronunciation of him, but Erdogan has his Jupiter at 16 Gemini. I don't know where his moon is, but the moon may be opposition his Jupiter. His Mercury and Venus are square his Jupiter, and then Saturn is coming over his Mercury and Venus. Saturn is going to be square his Jupiter. Plus, at the time of the solstice, the moon was opposition Saturn. The moon was exactly opposition his Mercury. And so that moon-Saturn opposition, which hits his Mercury-Venus conjunction, is baked into the solstice. So I'm thinking as a result of the solstice, in terms of what happens in Syria, I'm not convinced that Turkey is going to be so happy with the way things are working out, and particularly Erdogan. I think Erdogan with Syria. It might be short-term triumph, but long-term it could be a real problem for the country. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the solstice. I have gone on, I think, for perhaps rather too long, but I hope you found that of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe, and if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.